dell'arme, the Bolognese podcast where we discuss the intricacies of the Bolognese tradition. Today's guest is Conor Kemp-Cowell.
We have the man, the trash wizard, the meme lord, the hipster longsword master himself, Mr. Conor Kemp-Cowell. Conor, welcome to the podcast.
What's up, boys? How's it going?
It's great to have you, brother. It's great to see you, man. It looks like
Thanks
it's raining behind you.
Thanks for joining us today, Conor. This is great.
Yeah, I know.
Really psyched for today's show.
It's going to be interesting, folks. It's going to be a time.
Yeah, so listener discretion advised.
Yes, yeah. I have my own little bit written for that in particular. Let me read that off. Okay, so all right. So just so everybody is aware, the situations and things that we'll be discussing today are not dramatized or exaggerated in any way. A lot of it is graphic and triggering, and I would suggest that if the description of detailed violence, human suffering, and gore is something that you have an issue with, this is your warning, all right? We'll continue at your own discretion, all right? Another thing of note, I am not a doctor, I am not a nurse. I was an emergency room technician for 8 years at the second busiest level 1 trauma center in North Philadelphia. That's where my experience is going to come from. There's probably people who will be able to discuss the things that I'm going to talk about today in a lot better detail than me. I just have my own experiences, and that's what I'm going to be sharing.
Awesome. Yeah. So before we really kind of dive in here, Conor, how's Scotland?
I'm currently situated on the banks of the River Clyde, overlooking a very beautiful, rainy and foggy day here in lovely Scotland. It has been an arduous journey to get myself and the rest of my family over here. We're still in the process of that, but I've got a pretty solid job, and I found a really dope fencing club in the Vanguard Center, awesome. Run by Jonathan Spouge and Duncan McLaren, Marcus McCormick, and Thierry. I can't remember Thierry's last name. Just a wonderful bunch of fucking nerds who have taken me in with full love and compassion, and I'm very lucky to have them. It's been great so far. We're still kind of in limbo, but close to the finish line.
Awesome. Yeah, with the beard coming back and the long hair, you look very Scottish right now. I mean, you've got maybe it's just the aesthetic of the gray sky and the rain coming down too. It's just
I certainly look like a northerner, but I am not. I am firmly an Anglo-Irish American man.
So, now that you've moved to Scotland, to kind of segue into our topic today. I feel like my research has, like, in a way, kind of run in this sort of synchronous pattern with your move to Scotland, because so much of my focus has turned towards Scotland as I've been studying the Mariscotti family, who of course are part of the Douglas family, and I had to take a moment when I was writing one article to just kind of familiarize myself, because I'm not very familiar with Scottish history, but who the Douglas family was. And holy shit, like, the Douglas family is, like, probably one of the most badass families in human history. Like, these guys are incredible. Like, I if anybody's ever seen the movie The Outlaw King,
fucking great film. I love that movie.
Yeah, Black Douglas, James Douglas in that movie, he's a Douglas. And he would be a cousin of Galeazzo Mariscotti, who we're going to talk about here in a second. The Mariscotti family in Bologna, obviously, were descendants of the Douglas family. Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist, super cool, right? Kirk Douglas, the great actor, super cool. Like, holy shit, man. And, I mean, they've just worked their way into the royalty of Germany and Sweden and Italy, and been nobles all over Europe. They're just an incredible family. But speaking of Mr. Galeazzo Mariscotti, We're going to start off this discussion of our wounds with a little bit of an anecdote of a gunshot wound. Probably one of the more easier ones to relate, given the location of a lot of your experience. So,
Good old America. Yeah.
So Galeazzo Mariscotti, after Galeazzo Mariscotti had rescued Annibale Bentivoglio from the castle in Verano, he came back and they defeated Francesco Piccinino's forces, and then the Visconti came and basically tried to root them out so that way Gian Galeazzo Visconti could take back Bologna, and they were attacked by the army of Luigi del Verme. And so this is while Bologna is under siege. And there's also a force under Taliano Furlano, maybe? No. There's another force that's in Bologna that's in the Castello Galleria that is going to eventually get destroyed for this very reason. But I digress. So I'm going to read Galeazzo, a piece of Galeazzo's memoir here. It's going to take just a minute, but it's incredibly interesting. One, because we get his reaction. Two, because we get exactly what the doctor did. And three, because I think it's going to touch on something that you wanted to discuss. So here we go. All right. So the siege continuing in this way, all the soldiers remained close together on the outside towards the castle for a stretch of... That's probably not bombard, but it says bombard. It's a bad translation. Forgive me on the bad translation here. Defended by firm stockades and other ditches, and the people inside toward the market, in front of which there was a marvelous trench with excellent and safe shelters and bastions suitable for the defense of the people. One day, when it seemed appropriate to the magnificent Galeazzo to ruin and destroy the mill of Messer Battista da Piero, located in the Reno canal under the Galleria gate, because of course they were trying to cut the Reno canal, because that's what you do when you besiege Bologna, which those of the castle used for their own use. He called me with some of their friends and said to me, "Compadre, I have decided to make an experiment. If we could burn and demolish the mill of my relative, because it is too necessary for our enemies, what do you think?" I answered in the affirmative. This is Galeazzo in his memoir. So the order was given, and several very brave Bolognese and other brigades were called. And so we quietly went out to the Lamme gate. Coming along the canal from which the water had taken away, we damaged the mill and then entered it, finding many infantrymen who were guarding it, whom, mainly by me and other companions, attacked and fought. We drove them over a small bridge towards the castle, and which I was asking for fire to burn the mill, still standing at the door to keep the enemies at bay. Behold, among them, one cursed by God, who looked like a devil, with fire in his hand, who with a loaded gun wounded me in the left arm with such a foul and obscene blow that I dropped the shield from my hand, whereupon my companion, seeing me so badly injured because I was almost stunned, took me away from there, abandoning the enterprise they had begun, and carried me to my house to dress the wound. The doctor, finding that the lead ball had not come out of my arm because it remained in the elbow, had to make a cut from which, with pincers, he extracted the piece of lead, which, having entered the middle of my arm and had risen up to that part of the joint, thus one gains fame by doing good for one's country, but benefits little from nothing from it, since I had to pay for the doctor at my own expense and even go to the baths. So the damage was entirely my responsibility.
Some things never change. Some things really don't.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay. And of course, he bitches about this later. So
yeah. Well,
he's very bitter about that part.
I can't imagine that the insurance in Bologna was really good. You know, even if you were a member of the Mariscotti, you know, you might have gotten away with like a $200 copay, but like, you know, but to digress away from the horrors of the American medical system, at least for now, so it's interesting, right? So we kind of talked about this before the episode, and I knew we were going to relitigate this when we got here. But, the specific words that he uses when he said that he got shot, and also the fact that he said that he saw the guy who did it, right? I always find, at least because of my position and where I worked, I had to deal with a lot of violence on a regular basis. It's why I'm here talking to you now. And I've also been attacked by patients almost every other day. For whatever reason, right? A lot of folks come in to emergency departments for mental health crisis, for substance abuse crisis, because they're too inebriated and it's unsafe for them to leave. And, part of our job is to make sure that they are in a safe place and they are well taken care of, right? And in the times that I have been attacked by people, right, I was very safe. I was in a controlled place, and I knew how to make sure that my patient was safe whenever I had to handle them, and I had people that were there to watch my back, right? But I would always be able to tell when it was coming. And I've read accounts of people who were also attacked in a group or a crowd, and they saw the particular person that was doing it, and they stuck out to them. That's the first thing. The second thing is the way he describes him getting shot. Okay, so he said that he felt it, right? That his shield dropped and that his men had to grab him because he was almost stunned, right? In my experience watching videos online and then seeing people and speaking with people who were the victims of violence, or who have perpetrated violence, whatever the case may be, there's almost always three responses, and they're the natural responses that we have to emergency situations. That's fight, flight, or freeze. Okay, and when we continue to discuss different wounds that we're going to be seeing given or received on different people, okay, we should keep those things in mind, because the lovely thing about trauma and about trauma medicine is that putting holes in people, cutting people, getting crushed, all these things have not changed, at least in terms of our bodies. The ancients had the same bodies that we do, okay? And when it comes to external things, whether that be suturing, setting legs in place, I read a lovely paper that was written about 14th century medicine in the Netherlands, where they found a book that discussed setting a person's leg into traction after a femur fracture, and it was almost the exact same way that we do it today. And I was astounded.
That's incredible. Yeah.
And so the external factors haven't really changed, right? Obviously, internal medicine was dog shit because they were the best thing we can do to help you is to give you some medication that's going to make you throw up or shit yourself. Or yes, you have a humoral...
Balance your humors. Yeah.
Yes, you must balance your humors. But thankfully, we can sidestep a lot of that today and talk about the particular kind of mentality, the internal mental responses to trauma and the external responses to trauma, and kind of how those would be treated, right? So yeah, he gets shot, he drops his shield, he gets stunned, and then people have to pull him away. And having seen a lot of footage of people who have been assaulted with machetes, swords, guns, and having treated people who have had those wounds given to them, a lot of times they said that they were shook, right? They just stopped and they couldn't move, right? I think a lot of us have our particular responses that we default to in certain situations. And yeah, this guy obviously froze. He was shook because he realized that he got shot, right? And people had to pull him away physically so that he could get treatment. The other thing that's interesting here, right, is it says that the doctor, who was clearly a barber surgeon, a physician would not have touched this guy, right? Physicians were a different set away from surgeons during the period. And you have three rungs of surgeon in the period. You have learned surgeons who go to colleges in Padua, Venice, Bologna, who get doctorates, and they practice medicine as a public doctor. You have barber surgeons who are guys who apprentice under other surgeons for a period of 2 to 3 years before they start doing their own and then take up apprentice of their own. And these guys are the dudes who you see on the battlefield, you see with little shops in the middle of fucking nowhere villages. And probably the guy who treated our boy Galeazzo here. And that's what they do. And then you have the autodidacts, which are like dudes with books who maybe took a course or two and like learned a lot of local remedies, and like they just they're just doing their own thing out there, bud.
So basically the Hema-ists of the Renaissance world.
Precisely, yes, yeah. And the interesting thing is that the second tier of guys, they could get licensed by other barber surgeons who started the same way and become a little bit more legit. But not to digress any further, the bullet hits him in the arm, and it says that it lodges up in the elbow. I've seen bullets end up in the strangest places in people. I've seen bullets hit skulls, not go and not enter, and then transverse around and then exit out the back. I saw somebody get shot in the chest. The bullet went up and then around and out the back without hitting any major vasculature or organs.
That's amazing.
And the idea that like you have to get the bullet out is something that persists to this day. A lot of the times due to media and like, you know, we watch somebody get shot on TV, not like they're just like groaning in pain, and then they get the bullet taken out and then they're fine. They thought that like bullets were poison back then. Like if you got shot, like you were going to slowly get poisoned, which is why they took such circumstance to extract a bullet. Nowadays, right, now that we have the glory of modern medicine, we know that in a lot of cases, if you're shot and the bullet is lodged somewhere, it will come out on its own. We do not have to go in and make a big wound that can be a massive site of infection and then extract that bullet. Depending on the location, right, like he says that it entered his arm, that it ended up in like his elbow, that might have caused lifelong problems depending on where it was lodged in terms of like function and stuff like that. But whatever the case may be, this doctor thought it was a good idea to take the bullet out. And we do not think that as much anymore. But yeah, the part that he complains about the fucking cost of it, it's so on point. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So did he recovered from this, right?
He did, yeah. So he spent a long time in Lucca at the baths. Maybe that's where Guido Antonio de Lucca ended up coming to Bologna. Who knows?
Oh yeah. You said he was at the baths.
He was, yeah. So the baths, probably in Siena. So like Lucca, Siena area, there were some hot springs and some like healing baths that everybody kind of went to. You see it pretty often. Agnese della Spada, for example, when he decided to leave Bologna later on, when Galeazzo threatens to throw him out a window, he was the legate of Bologna. and they tried to institute a weapons ban in Bologna and basically fine anybody that was caught with a weapon without the legate's express permission. And so Galeazzo and Santi Bentivoglio went in there and were like, hey bro, we're not going to do this. And he's like, yes, you are. I'm the legate of Bologna. And they're like, no, we're going to throw you out that window. Dude, and then the Podesta was like,
gangster thing to say.
yeah. Oh man, he's such a colorful character. I really love Galeazzo Mariscotti. He's one of my favorite characters. He's a madman, but he's awesome.
The reason why I bring up the bath, right, the healing baths, okay, is that another like key defining feature of like late 15th century, early 16th century like health practice is medical plurality. So like, you know, today we follow like a very standardized procedure of how you're supposed to progress through the ranks to become a doctor, to become a nurse, to become like a paramedic, what have you, right? And all the kind of like ancillary and secondary staff that still play an important part of like the medical team. And we kind of touched on it a little bit, talking about like the delineations of barber surgeons and physicians a little bit a second ago. But another thing that like is a defining feature of the Renaissance in particular is like charlatans, right? Charlatans were not just like a thing that you called somebody who was like, you know, a person who picked that background in 5e Dungeons and Dragons, but also like a licensed guy who sold like snake oil. Like that's where the term charlatan comes from, is like these dudes who would like roll up to the piazza with like their wagon. They would get a bunch of like, you know, like local remedies, some of which worked, some of which didn't. Like one that was like really common, that became common due to like a charlatan being really good at his work, was a way for there to be more breast milk production. So like they found an herb that worked particularly well, and that guy made like a lot of money, if I recall correctly, off of doing that. Right. So you have those guys, you have bath spas, right? Because another thing that's important about humoral medicine and stuff like that is it's not just about like balancing the humors, but it's about what you put into your body, what you take out of your body, right? So like surgeons would like go and stay at a person's house, look after their injury, give them exercises, like particular regimens that they had to do. Enemas were a big thing. You'd have to, they'd give, yeah, I know. It's funny. They'd give you a lot of enemas, but they'd also like cook you special meals for your humors in particular. And health spas would do a lot of that same kind of stuff too, along with, also kind of being brothels depending on where you were at. But like, yeah, that's like right in line. It's very interesting that like that's exactly where he went to after he had this injury. Tracks.
Yeah, so I was giggling at the enemas, not necessarily because enemas are funny, though enemas are incredibly funny. I was actually giggling because prior to Filippo Maria Visconti, I might have misspoke earlier and said John Galeazzo, but I meant Filippo Maria. But his predecessor, his father, John Galeazzo Visconti, actually tried to have a surgeon assassinate Rupert of Bavaria by giving him a poisoned enema. The Holy Roman Emperor, John Galeazzo Visconti, tried to murder the Holy Roman Emperor with a poison enema. So literally told him to shove it up his ass.
If you can't get him through his dinner, you can get him through his treatments. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
To build on this point, sorry, I've got so many asides I can just go on for days. Yeah. But to kind of put us back on track here, another interesting anecdote that comes from Galeazzo's memoir is later on he gives this really interesting statement when after Annibale Bentivoglio is murdered and the Canatoli family is out to basically wipe out the entire Marescotti family, running around the city yelling "Flesh, flesh, death!"
Yeah,
death.
I read that article. That was great.
That's a crazy way to announce that you're taking over the city. A bunch of cannibals. All right, so either way, this is as he and his brothers are being attacked, and he says, "And so it was before the convent of the nuns of San Mattia, that my strenuous and brave brother Giovanni, although surrounded by many, intrepidly and valiantly died, defending himself like a lion, as we could offer him no assistance, as we were opposed by an exorbitant number of men. With great difficulty and a few companions, I took refuge in the house of the aforementioned nuns, after receiving a few wounds, as happens to those who defend themselves, though none were of a nature to cause any significant damage." So here we have Galeazzo engaged in a sword fight where the presupposition of him going into this fight not going into it, he didn't do so willingly, but being engaged in the sword fight against an exorbitant number of men was that you are going to get wounded. And that was understood. And that to me is just so important for what we do in HEMA because, typically, and rightfully, we tend to look at doubles and say doubles are bad, but doubles are a reality, and it's something. Happen,
yeah.
Right? Manciolino speaks to this. He says that if you do get struck and you have to strike back, make sure that you reclaim your valor. This is a trope that we see time and again in the Bolognese corpus and throughout historical manuscripts, but that really just kind of confirms it, where we have this person who's going through this traumatic situation, receiving wounds, and understanding that that's just kind of the reality.
Yeah, how many masters have we read where they say that we cannot do what we do without being bold, without being brave? Because if you are fighting, you have to anticipate that you are going to be injured. Very rarely will you walk out of it completely clean. That's the ideal. That's the hope, right? And you can only do the best you can. But it's always chances, and you increase your chances with skill and with luck, right? The more you practice, the better. The less chance you have the less chance you have of not making it out. In this situation where he said, he made it out with only a couple of injuries, as is to be expected, right? Like I've seen people who have been cut up before by knives, and to a lesser extent, I've seen some pretty serious injuries from machetes and from knives, where like they just have like lacerations that are, not even penetrating the skin, where they just have like a cut that's very superficial. Maybe some fat is showing underneath, but that's not going to incapacitate them. That's not going to stop them from being like ready to defend themselves or to escape, which would be the ideal, right? And to hear him say, do we know what he was wearing that day? I'm assuming just basic clothes.
He was wearing basic clothes, yeah, because later on he's going to go and he's going to armor up and go out and engage in a fight, right? So he's probably out in just his regular doublet, because he and his brother they finally got money from the city in compensation after a long trek, and the first thing they did is went out and got a new wardrobe. So
yeah, I was also telling you about this in the lead up to us running this episode, but there was one particular case I had where a patient of mine was attacked by a person with a knife, and the knife, like they got stabbed right in the chest on the sternum. Okay. And the blade did not penetrate their hoodie or their tank top that they had underneath. They only had a bruise on their sternum. The bleed did not break, but they got stabbed, and they were able to grab the person, take the knife out, and then hold them on the ground until first responders arrived. And incredible. That can just happen, right? Clothes do a pretty good job. We wear a lot less clothes than they did back in the day, right? But a little bit of fabric can go a long way in terms of making sure that you make it out of a situation when we're talking about swords and knives and all that bullshit.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I said, it's not surprising for me to hear him say that like he made it out of there with minimal wounding. This man is a fighting man. That's what he does for his livelihood, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Go ahead.
No, so it's the thing that got me wondering about the Bolognese body mechanics, which when you employ them tend to hit, let's say, excessively hard by modern standards. And do you think then it's kind of predicated on the idea then if you are going to hit somebody, you want to make sure you hit them in a way that will fuck them up through all their clothes and whatnot?
Yeah, that's just the reality of the material like culture that we're working with, right? The thing that I always think of, right? And there's these times where I will be fencing and something will happen to me, or I will do something to another person, and I can physically see the picture of what that type of wound would do to them, just because of my background. Cool-ish. But the one in particular that always gets me is the imbricata into Portaferro stretta. Like the amount of thrust that you have on that particular action with a step, it's fucking brutal. And the action of you uncoiling the arm back just kind of naturally withdraws the sword in whatever way. When you throw a falso to a person's hand and you get good spin on it, even if it lands flat, that's going to break their fingers. That's going to fuck up some tendons, like no problem. Or, if it doesn't penetrate, just that concussive force is going to do something to them. There's plenty of videos out there of people cutting with long swords, of course. We need to do some more. I think we need more material testing, period. Just having people cutting shit. Of people just like cutting a gambeson and like delivering a deep cut with just a slight chamber and like a little flick. You never know. The other big thing I want to take away. I want people at home to take away from this is you never know what's going to happen when you hit somebody. You know more than likely that it's going to fuck them up. That is the more assured fact, right? But you never know how a blade is going to interact with a person when you hit them. There's this
basically
wonderful...
the rolling the die 8 is more accurate than you would expect. It could be a 1, it could be an 8, or anywhere in between.
Exactly, right? And that's why, that's why you should attack first and know how to defend yourself.
Right. Yeah. So, this is actually super interesting because I think in the Bolognese corpus in particular, I think, and obviously I'm speaking to that because that's my level of experience, but
of course,
when it comes to the targeting of specific things. Like the way that they target legs, for example, typically you want to target the lead leg of your opponent when they come in with an attack, right? And that leg is under tension. And if you know what happens with ligaments when they're under tension, they're like taut rubber bands. And when you pop a tendon, it goes, and then the limb stops working, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you're aiming to do.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is the cutting plane is usually going to be horizontal rather than descending. Mm-hmm. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't. Yeah.
No. That was almost exactly what I was gonna talk about, because I watched a video not too long ago of a guy who was in a street fight, and a dude was on the ground and the person was standing up, and he was able to draw like this big knife and just fucking whack him on the thigh, and his whole thigh split in two. And and he wasn't able to, he was able to stand. The guy backed up and he wasn't able to follow him. He had to clutch and pull his thigh together into one single piece, and then people grabbed him and pulled him away. Right? Like when you're talking about leg cuts, your ideal cut is at least like to the knee, to the thigh. Yeah, it's almost like there's some people who talk about that in too. like Fiore and Fadi, maybe.
Yeah.
Those are your fucking ideal targets, at least when you're talking about Largo targets, right?
Right. And I think that, so to just build on that too, I think for the Bolognese masters, I don't think that the leg cuts typically go below the knee or to the shin, because if you look, most of the ending guard positions of those cuts are usually strata guards. Yeah. And you can't finish a cut in a strata guard if you're attacking somebody in the shin. You're going to end up in a...
Except for the Anonimo, who does have one attack to the shins, because it's the Anonimo.
Well,
he also attacks the feet, because he's just a show off.
He's just...
Yeah, somebody's got to do it.
Somebody's got to do it, damn it.
So to kind of bring this together from a sense of what to expect for wounds, what wounds might be more serious, and kind of the general sense of how they perceived what wounds were more serious than others, and charlatans at the same time, really kind of bringing this all back together. This is from letters from the Duke of Urbino, and this is a scenario. It's going to be a little bit long, but it builds into something that's super interesting. So,
okay.
This is in the early 1500s. I think it's like 1508 or 9. The Francesco that they're referring to is Francesco Maria della Rovere. So here we go. On the 5th, the Duke was within a few miles of Urbino, then held by Bishop Vitelli, with a garrison of 2,000 men, who, distrusting the inhabitants, summoned their militia to muster San Bernardino, and closed the gates as soon as the city had thus been cleared of its able-bodied men, refusing to readmit them on pain of instant death. The excluded citizens vented their indignation at this trick in threats and abuse of the garrison from under the very walls, which at length provoked a sortie of 400 infantry in order to disperse them. At this juncture, a squadron of 100 cavalry sent by Francesco Maria under Benedetto Garradi of Mondolfo, for the purpose of supporting the expected rising in this favor, arrived 3 miles below Urbino, and, whilst breathing their horses, heard that the enemy were abroad. Benedetto immediately left his little force in charge of his brother Annibale, and rode on with 5 officers to recontour. The adventure which followed, equally worthy of a bold knight-errant and a Christian soldier, must be told in the dialogue of his nephew Tranquillo. Coming suddenly upon the detachment about half a mile from the town, Benedetto exclaimed, "Look there, as these are the first of our master's foes we have fallen in with. It would surely be a shame to let them get back to the city without a taste of us. I am therefore resolved to make a dash at them, and if you will follow me, by God's grace, we shall have the first victory." This said, he rushed into the midst of them. with visor up and lance in rest, overthrowing many by the shock. His weapon having broken, he performed prodigies with his sword, and aided by his fellows who had not shrunk from his summons, the enemy leaders were slain, and their whole battalion dispersed in panic through the fields, where most of them were put to death by the excluded townsfolk who had mustered at the first alarm. I too came up with our squadron, in time to cut off a good many of them, but I had little cause to congratulate myself upon that success, for passing near my brother Benedetto, he said to me, Annibale, I am killed. Whereupon, looking towards him, I observed a cut to his face, and told him to fear nothing, as face wounds were not mortal. But he replied, it's worse than that, for I am run through the body by a pike. At those words my heart seemed riven asunder, yet in order not to alarm him, I desired him to cheer him up, and condemned myself to God Almighty, and to the most glorious Mother of our Savior, and to vow his armor and horse to Loreto, adding that I would offer a housing worth 25 ducats. I am content, answered he, to give this horse a gallant Turkish charger bestowed upon me by the Marquis of Mantua, along with these arms, but I have only one favor to ask of the Savior of mankind, which is that he will permit me to live long enough to confess myself. As he did this, an observantine monk, I guess that's an order of sorry, that was a bit of a tongue twister, who had on former occasions confessed him, came up and therefore thanked God for having heard this prayer. He summoned the monk and returned to Cavallino, confessed himself. There being no surgeon at hand, a gentleman of Mantua named Stegino cleansed the wound by suction, and ascertained that the bowels were not pierced, which afforded me much hope. I sent for many surgeons. The first that arrived was Macchione of Fossombrone, who dressed the wound with charmed bandages, a thing that much displeased my brother, and for conscience sake he refused to be doctored in that way, until persuaded by the friar, who assured him that there was no sin, seeing that there had been no diabolical incantation used, and being told of numerous miracles effected by these cloths, he submitted to them, and ere long was restored to health.
Fucking charmed bandages. Okay. All right.
Did you guys use those in Philadelphia?
Yeah, all the time. That and milk.
Antibiotics, man.
So the first thing I want to touch upon is him saying, I'm slain. Okay. Because this shows up a lot in different dueling accounts, and also it happens a lot of the time when people have been mortally wounded. They know that they're going to die or they are close to death. I've read my fair share of secondary and tertiary sources, and there's been a bunch of incidences where people have been stabbed in the chest. They withdraw, like the person who stabbed them withdrawed, they grab themselves and they go, you killed me. And then they die, right? That's something that is not uncommon, and oftentimes when we see that happen in modern day, the person will like stumble back or run away and say, I'm gonna die, bro, I'm gonna fucking die. The amount of times that people have stepped out of a car, or I have pulled them out of a car and they have told me that to my face and asked me not to let them die, I cannot even count. That has happened to me plenty of times. And sometimes they're just shot in the leg and it's going to be fine. But of course, who wouldn't be fucking scared, right?
Right.
But you can tell when they know. And to hear him say that when he's run through with a lance, that completely tracks with like what we know. Like some of the language there does sound a bit hokey, right? Because it's a bit old timey. And this is a memoir that this is written from, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, there's a little bit of zhuzh going in there, but like that's totally legit. Now on to the treatment. The wound sucking. The wound sucking is something that I didn't expect to talk about until we got a little bit later, because there's well documented accounts of people who were wound suckers in like the 1600s and the 1700s, so 17th century, 18th century, right? And their whole job, and a lot of the time this was like the drummer boys, they were like the designated wound sucker. They they would. There's an account of like a guy who got ran through with a sword in like the 1600s, and like the drummer boy dropped his shit, ran over, saw that he was run through like I think it was the left chest, like the left upper chest. So possible involvement with lung, possible like significant like vasculature damage, right? And the guy sucked the wound because he saw it bubbling, and the guy got better a little bit, enough for him to get back to the tent. And it said the next day that he was found roaming the streets and drinking. So like the idea of like thoracic surgery is a thing that like I wasn't really too sure about when it came to like these particular periods, because you're dealing with a lot of very complex stuff, the stuff that makes us stay alive, right? You know, it said that he was ran through the intestines, right? Like in like the lower body?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, depending on the angle, that's more or less significant. If the angle is upwards, right, then you're dealing with involvement of the diaphragm, right? So that's issues with breathing. That's possible heart, lung involvement that's involved there. But the intestines are give or take in this period, because if you have a perforated bowel or something along those lines, you're talking about sepsis for days. You're talking about these people dying a slow and miserable death due to infection, right? And that's what we often see a lot of the times when we hear is like, okay, he got stabbed in a duel with a rapier, and then 4 days later they passed comfortably in their home, but they were obviously writhing in pain and agony that whole time. But, you know, it sounds like at least they did the right thing. They didn't remove the lance. They were able to let him say his fucking prayers. And then they had somebody come in, clean the wound. I frankly, if I was laying down on the ground and somebody was like, yeah, I brought these charmed bandages for you, I'd be like, fuck no, get those things the fuck away from me. But like you were saying, this ties directly into like charlatan stuff, and also like the tying of medicine to religion during the period is like very extensive. Because Ambrose Paré, like the father of like modern French surgery, who's like active during like this period, he grows in significance during like the Italian wars in like the 1530s ish, somewhere around there, between like France like trying to take Lombard, if I recall correctly. He says like, I did my, like his like famous quote is, I did my work and then God healed them. That's what he says, right? And that's like a famous line that's continuous throughout the period. And you see that with this exact thing, that like, you know, they're tying like their religion along with their medicine right there. And it makes sense. It doesn't surprise me that he recovered, depending on like, you know, they did everything that was the appropriate thing to do. But another thing to picture here is that they don't have like suction. They have some kind of irrigation to like clean things out, right? Who knows the quality of the water or whatever the fuck it is that they're using. But the sutures are like ligation, like closing of like vasculature to prevent bleeding, is only really just becoming a thing in a way that's like conducive to health. What they would do is they would get a hot poker and they would fucking cauterize your arteries and then cut off your limb or whatever the case may be, right? A lot of times they would use boiling oil too, which is also, I cannot picture something worse. We can also thank Paré for changing us around on that, because he read, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Galen or Hippocrates, who talked about like a particular kind of mixture of like egg whites, turpentine, and rose water that he used as like a way to cauterize wounds and like to seal stuff up. But yeah, that one is particularly gruesome. Yeah, a lance wound to the abdomen. Oof. Ooh. I had a guy who. I had a patient who got thrown over the front of their handlebars one time while they were going down. Philly is very good for its potholes. If you ever want to go to Philadelphia and you want to experience some good old American potholes, Philadelphia is great for that. He got thrown over a pothole, and the his stomach rubbed up against like was caught on like the front of his handlebar so much that it completely eviscerated him. And an evisceration is when your colon, your intestines are like open. Yeah, he got like speared onto the front of his bike. His intestines fully opened up, and he made a full recovery. He was fine. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Medicine is cool.
Yeah, medicine is very cool. There's a reason why I still do it. I love my fucking work. But yeah, that's wild. Especially because they said that they sent out for surgeons and they never got anybody. They just had some guy.
Yeah.
Just had some guy there. I guess he took a course or two back in the day. Who knows?
So it's actually, I think one of my favorite things too is the fact that like his brother looks at him and he's like, don't worry, bro. The face wound's fine. Don't worry about it. Mm-hmm. That's not going to kill you.
Yeah, like here's another good one for you. Early on in my career, like 2-3 years deep, it was a very quiet night in the emergency department. We were all just like kind of like taking care of like our we very like non-serious patients. It was quiet, right? It's the word you never say in the emergency department.
That's
but
right.
I'm not
it's a
there.
Curse.
Yeah, it's quiet. I was sitting at like the main desk and I look out the ambulance bay doors and I see red and blue lights and I'm like, nobody noticed it, right? And I was just like, hey guys, something's wrong. And then like I heard like banging on the that was a different one. I saw like this guy like with his arms splayed out, covered in like what looked like clothing, and like somebody like shuffling him towards us, and I was like, oh no. And I ran out there, I went into the trauma bay, I grabbed a stretcher, I ran out there and I grabbed this guy and I put him on and I pulled back he had like a blanket covering his head. And his whole face was cut open. Like there was flaps of skin hanging all across his head with arterial bleeding. His skull was exposed all in the front of his face, except for his eyes were intact, thank God. We were able to staunch the bleeders and we were able to suture his face back up. He was going to need plastics and a follow-up after that, but we were able to all do that in our trauma bay. And he didn't pass. He was a non-critical case, and apparently he was attacked by like a couple of people in the street with kitchen knives. They just carved his head up. It was completely open. He didn't even look like a person when I got him initially. I cannot describe how like flapped up his face was. And yeah, like obviously when you're talking about dealing with a sword that is for use on horseback, you're talking about a lot more percussive injury involved in that, right? You're talking about, things entering into the orbits, entering into the skull. You're going to come out looking like Tyrion Lannister at the end of the Blackwater battle, kind of situation here. But like, unless you have penetrative capability into the skull, it's going to be. Like I said, it's all chance and probability. There's plenty of people who will just, upon seeing themselves so injured, will have a heart attack and die. That's rare, but it does happen. But less significant, right? Like that guy, the most concern that he had was with the abdominal wound, which fucking lucky guy.
Yeah, I can't remember if this is one of the Bolognese masters, but somebody actually says it's better to get hit in the head. But obviously Manciolino gives us the whole anecdote of if you are going to get hit with the strong and the sword rather than with the point of percussion or with the point, basically.
Well, that also kind of ties back into what we were talking about before the podcast started, on top of the many references that we've made to that now. But, if you look across the board of all the sources, the two most common targets that are discussed, period, are cutting or thrusting the head, cutting or thrusting the hands, or thrusting the chest, right? And to tie that in with our three responses, right? Fight, flight, and freeze. Generally speaking, when people get hit in the head, they get stopped for a second. I have had my own personal experience with this, where there was one time that I was being the biggest dingus known to man, and I was swinging around my fetter at the beginning of a tournament, trying to get myself prepped up, trying to get myself warm, and a friend of mine who will go unnamed, they did not do anything to me, this is all self-inflicted, comes up and crosses swords with me, and I'm like, oh, you know what, okay, like I can do a little bit of slow play, no big deal. I was not slow whatsoever. We're doing this thing. He overbinds me. I go to make like a tight cut around to like act like I'm going to cut to the other opening, and I go and I hit myself in the forehead in the upper the upper right corner of my forehead. And I don't think anything of it because I've been an idiot. I've hit myself in the head with swords plenty of times before. And I go, ah, ha, ha, I'm so stupid. And his face drops and his eyes open up. And I'm like, why is he looking at me like that? And he goes, you're bleeding. And I'm like, what? And then I saw my field of vision turn red. And I went, oh God. And I ran as fast as I could to the sinks. I washed myself out and I went over to the medic's table. They didn't have to put any sutures, no surgical glue, nothing like that, and they just put a pressure bandage around my head, and that was it for me. And yeah, so like face injuries, like they can be really, really good, at least and like if we're reading the sources correctly, they say that the head is the primary target that we're going to be hitting most often than not, right? And that's not just for disabling, right? That can be for, because like we said, we never know what our sword is going to do when we hit somebody, right? It can totally just ace them, possibly, maybe, right? And you could take them out, or it stuns them and you can set up for something else afterwards. Thrusts to the chest, pretty much consistently across the board, will probably kill somebody the next day or the day after that, but I think at least across my reading, a thrust to the chest, while the most lethal, is kind of iffy on whether or not you're going to stop them right then and there. Yeah. Cuts to the arms and the hands are incredibly disabling, though. Like at least reading the sources. I remember there was like an account of some guy who was on a ship and he got like he was like fighting with like a two-handed sword or something along those lines, and he got like shot to bits and fucking cut up, and then finally the thing that took him out was that he got cut in the hand a bunch of times. And at least in my own personal experience, there was an incident that I had where machetes were involved. Two guys came in, they were both cut to pieces. One guy had his scalp completely opened up. Same kind of deal with one single clean cut that went from the forehead all the way back to the hairline. He's completely open. I could see the fissures in his skull. And he had his left arm that was very clearly dropped. The machete had passed through the radius entirely. His ligaments were entirely exposed, and his arm was dropped. It was like in two different area codes. And there is no way that he was going to continue fighting or defending himself, for that matter, right? After that occurs. Yep. But if he got hit in the head, he might not even notice that. You never really know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so that kind of leads me into my last anecdote here. So we've got similar time period. So still, because this is where my research is at right now, is 1450s Bologna, because it's a crazy time.
Seems like it.
1450s. On the 25th of March, a Thursday, the Regimental was called to vote on a bill, or a bolletta. During the discourse, Matteo de Bernardino della Corregge, a Caneschi, got into a heated argument with Gerardo de Capello, a Bentivoleschi. The spat spilled over into violence when della Corregge drew his spada and tried to wound del Capello. Unfortunately for della Corregge, Capello's son was nearby, and when he saw his father's life in danger, he drew his storda, speaking of machetes, right, and took 3 good whacks at della Corregge's skull. Capello's son fled to the Palazzo of Mariscati. When Corregge heard about this, they started gathering men to take revenge. Now, the interesting thing about this is that it took, I think, 5 days for him to die. Yes, on the 30th, he died. It took him 5 days to die. He gets blindsided by 3 whacks to the skull with a storda, and it takes him 5 days to die.
Yeah, and had they had access to modern medicine, who's to say whether or not he would have been able to survive or not? So I've never had to do this or assist. I've never had to assist with this because I'm never the person that's actually doing this shit. I've never had to assist with this specifically for trauma, but I've had to assist with this for a lot of hemorrhagic strokes, right? So hemorrhagic stroke is when a blood vessel in an artery in the brain bursts and then fills a hemisphere or a region with blood, right? And when you have increased cranial pressure, what will happen to the brain is that there will be no space for it because it's enclosed, and it will push itself down the foramen magnum, like the big hole where your spinal cord goes into. And as you can guess, that's not really good.
Right.
So what we will do is we will drill a hole into your skull to relieve the pressure. And while we don't have an account of this, these are all wealthy people that probably have access to medical care. And in a case that I read about Lorenzo de Medici, I can't tell if it's forward in time, because he was Duke of Urbino during this time. So I think it's like mid 1500s, somewhere around there. He gets shot in the back of the head with an arquebus, right? And the bullet doesn't penetrate the skull. It goes transverse around, and there is a plaster cast of his skull, and you can see where the bullet hit and then went around. And
it's incredible.
Yeah, so he was pulled off of his horse, and he was brought to a surgeon's tent, and they trepanned, and that's what it's called. Trepanation is when you drill a hole into a person's head, and humans have been doing that for as long as we've understood that, like, opening brains up good when brain is under pressure. And his surgeon at the time, like his family's doctor, was like, that shouldn't have happened because it didn't penetrate at all, right? It hit and it skipped. But in this particular case of concussive force, like the sword, as I understand it, is like a falchion, right? It's a heavier cutting sword. When you hit the head, right, you're not just dealing damage through laceration, you're dealing concussive force. That can kill somebody, no problem. Depends on what day, but incapacitation is ideally the thing that you're looking for when you hit somebody. You hit them, you do not have to worry about them trying to hit you anymore, right? And this obviously did its purpose because that guy had to fucking leave. But I've had cases of people getting hit in the head with machetes. Aside from the one time that I talked about, I had a patient who was hit in the head 3 times with a machete while they were defenseless, and I could see their brain through their skull, and they made a full recovery. I don't know how long it took them, but I remember asking about the case maybe a month or 2 later, and I found out that the patient was fine.
It's incredible.
It is, right? And possibly fortunate that the patient's skull had been opened up because it relieved the pressure that possibly could have gone through, that could have been contained. That was the one thing I was trying to find more of when I was doing my research for this episode, was more cases where somebody was like hit in the head. They like retained like a closed fracture, like a closed injury, and like they died from the pressure of that. But we don't really get a lot of information on those things. There was one case that I read by Piero, which I'm gonna find the quote for now, and it's while he's on campaign in the Italian Wars. Let's see, where is it? Where are we? Yeah. And remember that Piero is the guy who who wrote about ligation for arteries and stuff like that, closing bleeding before like amputating limbs or doing anything like that. He also was an inventor of a lot of prosthesis. Enucleation or removal of eyes was something that he did a lot of, and a lot of barber surgeons did as well. If you get hit in the face and your eye is so severely damaged, that can certainly be a case of something that occurs.
That's what happened to Ascanio della Corna, the famous 2-sword duelist. He got a lance through the eye and lost his eye. He had to pop it out.
Not a fun time. Yeah.
And then he won 2 2-sword duels with one eye. So badass. Imagine if he had 2.
I guess.
Okay. All right. So this is about a guy who is hungry as shit during this war, and he goes into a church where a bunch of peasants are to try to find food. So I'm going to start the quote there. Whither the peasants had retired, thinking to find victuals by love or force. But among the rest, this man was well beaten, and came back with several sword cuts to the head, the least penetrating to the second table of the skull. And he had 4 others on the arms. one on the right shoulder, which cut more than one half of the omniplate or shoulder blade. So his shoulder blade got cut in fucking half. He was brought back to his master's lodging, who, seeing him so wounded, and that they were to depart thence the next morning at daybreak, and not thinking that he could have ever been cured, made dig a grave, and would have cast him there, otherwise the peasants would massacre and kill him. Where is the fucking quote? Geez, I lost it. I had the bit where what happens after, but the guy, he has to have more bone removed from his head. He loses the ability to talk. He gets a fever and he starts seizing a lot. And so Piero removes an entire section of this guy's skull that he says is like this, like the size of his palm in width, and that it was all black, and that there was a bunch of worms under there that he had to remove. And then he made the guy a hard leather hat, and he was never able to speak again, but he survived.
Holy shit! How did the worms get under there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also in his book, Piero talks about quacks. And like one of the anecdotes that he talks about is like how a lot of barber surgeons will tren-pan a patient and then just immediately slap a plate on there and not let any pressure relieve from the skull, not let the humors out, right? And how he's seen people do it with like plates of gold and silver. And he talked about one guy who used a piece of gourd and put that on the dude's head wound. And I could just picture the smell of rot coming off of that just so well, the pungency. Yeah, so like we're pretty good at treating concussive force here, and while they might not know the science, they get the idea of it, generally speaking. And the time period that we're talking about in particular, we're very fortunate to have so much writing about, because these people become more prolific writing about it, and we can see the process of advancement in medicine from this period onwards. Yeah, it's really cool. Like Piero also, speaking to his like prosthesis stuff, he was a big proponent of trying to save limbs whenever possible. And like there was this guy that he was treating later on in his life who was, I can't remember if he was an officer, he was some type of higher up, right? The guy receives a cut to the arms from a cutlass and it drops his limb. And he rides back to Piero and is like, I need you to cut off my arm so I can get a prosthesis done. And Piero refuses to do it. He's like, no, I'm not gonna cut your arm off. Let me look at this. He staunches the bleeding, and then he develops a device that goes over top of his hand that has like a ring around his thumb and like these triggers on his fingers attached to a cuff that goes onto his forearm. And by pulling like these strings on the arm, he can open and close his hand without having to get it cut off. Yeah, I know, right? Cool. Like these guys, these folks generally had an idea of how to do things when it came to external medicine. Was it backed by some really fucking weird shit? Yes, but you know, you can see the process evolving.
It's crazy, though, how much they understood this and just had no sense of germ whatsoever. It's just mind-boggling.
The other funny thing, too, is like the entire basis of like quote-unquote Western medicine, although every like kind of like medical advancement we have for this period up until now is based in like Middle Eastern doctors. And like one of the things that like became big was that a lot of stuff got translated from I can't remember if it was Arabic. Somebody in the comments, please come back and give me citations here, because I'm talking a little bit outside of my base. But a lot of stuff was translated from Arabic into Latin, and like there was a huge boom in medicine because of that occurring, right? And yeah, it was one of the big parts of like the renaissance of medicine during the period. And that's what it was. Whereas before, things were based off of Galen's medical theory, and the guy didn't like do any autopsies or any dissections on humans. He just based everything off of vivisections of animals. And so like they were still using like these theories that were like, and of course, you know, like animal biology is similar to human biology, of course, but like, you know, the guy's whole shtick was like the best way to learn is by doing things on your own. and like experimenting with like the world on your own, and people just read out of his book and didn't do any of that until like the resurgence of autopsies became common practice during this period, and that's where we get the greats like Da Vinci and all the rest of the guys that I can't remember the names.
Yeah, even Alessandro Achillini, right? Giovanni Fiottilo Achillini's his brother. He was the first one to dissect and kind of identify the parts of the inner ear, which is interesting. Because he got bored with philosophy, so he went into medicine because, he thought it was cool.
Because it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why be philosophical when you can actually get your hands dirty?
Yeah. So, cool. Stephen, do you want to talk about a few of the duels that you've been researching lately?
Yeah,
and, some of the ones that you've seen?
Yeah, this is the one I think I'm the most interested in here. This is, we're going to go to Florence, 1529 or 1530 during the siege. There's a duel. I'm going to just cut right to it. Okay? So, Ludovico's partner Dante was due to fight against Bertino. At their first pass, Dante struck Bertino's right cheek and hit him too with a thrust to the face and the mouth. But this thrust was but a light one. Yet Bertino continued to assail him with such fury, giving him 3 wounds to the arm, 1 serious and 2 minor. Dante was in such a bad state that he would have been forced to surrender to Bertino had Bertino kept his cool, for Dante no longer had the strength to hold the sword in one hand and was forced to use both hands to wield it. So before we continue on, let's just take a look at that. What can you tell us about that?
Okay, so like we've been discussing, right? So superficial wounds to the face, well, unless like they are, immediately debilitating or pierce into the skull, they can be classified as flesh wounds given probability, chance, and a D20 roll.
Right.
And the more significant thing here is that the person who is stabbed in the face responds with cuts to the arm that almost debilitate this guy and make him almost unable to continue the fight without doing his sword. And then that final blow that is delivered is a thrust. So between the tongue and the roof of the mouth, I'm guessing that this probably penetrates.
Oh, we haven't got to that part yet.
Okay.
I was going to talk about the superficial wounds to the hand that kept him from doing it, but let's just get to the good stuff.
Yeah, let's get the good stuff here.
Let's get to the good stuff. Okay, so we've got Bertino, who's winning the fight, and Dante, who's losing it. And Dante can barely use his sword, needs 2 hands to use it. But now, with a remarkable perspicacity, Dante kept a ready eye upon his opponent's actions, and seeing Bertino come towards him with the customary fury and thoughtlessness of youth, this apt Dante shoved a thrust into Bertino's mouth, between the tongue and the roof of his mouth. This immediately swelled Bertino's right eye. So tell us about this wound. Yeah, because this turns out to be the fight ender.
Yeah, so a little bit of pre-reading crept in there. I fucking love this one.
Yeah, me too.
So the thrust, like between the roof of the mouth and the tongue, I imagine that penetrates at a steep angle, right? So we're talking about a steep angle, and it swells the right eye. Okay, so this guy probably got pierced through his sinus and then into the skull, into the brain. Most likely, that angle is really fucking bad, right? Like we said, all wounds are like snowflakes, really. They're all
like snowflakes.
They're unique, and each one is dependent. Although the treatment can change depending on how severe, but depending on that roll of the dice, right?
Right.
And this one in particular is a very significant injury. Depending on, if we were able to get some advanced imaging of what this guy's brain looked like, and through the sands of history, we have lost the particular details of what exactly this fucking thrust hit.
Right.
But yeah, the swelling of the right eye, that means that there is probably a massive hemorrhage occurring somewhere in a confined space. The bulging of the eye tells me that, it hit one of the major arteries inside of the head. There's no bones about that.
Okay.
I had a guy who got shot in the face and the bullet went through his mouth, bounced, and then came out of his eye, and his eyeball was hanging outside of the skull.
Oh, Jesus.
I can't remember if it was the other way around. It was either went through the eye or went through the mouth and came out. But anyway, that guy was incapacitated. He could not. We had to do everything for him. He was brought in by emergency responders, and when you're talking about bleeding in that confined space, it happens very rapidly, and that blood has no place to go. So it presses up on everything that it's close by to, and that can be including the brain, right? And this was Dante that this happened to, right? Or was this Bertino?
This is Bertino that it happened to. Dante stabbed Bertino.
Dante stabbed Bertino. Did Bertino have to get dragged off? Did they say what happened to him?
Yeah, it's there. Let me bring that up here. Just a sec. So, looking at the next one. So I think he was no longer able to fight, and they ended the fight right there.
Okay, so they don't say exactly what happens to him, and this is an issue that I found in my research because I was trying to find particulars about barber surgeons and physicians being at duels, because there is the ghost of them, the specter of them there in this period, but they don't say anything in particular about it. Like there's that one duel where that guy gets hit in the leg with a cut. And he can't continue, but he doesn't surrender, and so they, whoever's officiating,
coup de Jarnac.
Well, I don't think it's,
right.
Is it the coup de Jarnac where like he doesn't give up his sword?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the coup de Jarnac where the leg cut happens, he doesn't give up his sword after they're carted off, and like the officiant comes back and is like, "Yo, if you do not give up your sword, we're gonna remove your stitches and then put you back in the field the way that you were before." And that is a great line, but if you think about it, right? Somebody sutured his wound. Somebody healed him after that occurred.
So somebody was there to do that.
That wasn't the coup de Jarnac then. That was something else. Because in the coup de Jarnac, he ends up killing him eventually. He dies. Yeah.
That's what I thought. But yeah, so like the guy got sutured. He got treated right there at the dueling field, and then like all of these quotes for this particular thing that I'm referencing right now comes back to the 16th century Italian duel by Bryson, I think is the last name, or Brian?
Yeah,
Bryson.
Yeah.
In the book, he talks about how like a lawyer tells somebody who's about to duel to not have a dinner with an officiant like a surgeon. That's what he says in the book. So like, you know, you're not supposed to schmooze up to the doc before you have to do your fight. Which means that like they were present, and right. we know that in like the later periods when like private dueling is a thing in like the 18th century, that like doctors would be there, but they like face away and whatever the kind of apocryphal stories of that are. But like they've always been present, and I assume probably what happened with this guy is he might have walked off. He might have like been like, I can't fight anymore, and then walked off and then died later because
I think exactly what happened. He surrenders and then he dies the next day.
Yeah. He probably walked off and then was treated back at his house.
Right.
But yeah, with that kind of bleeding, that incredible trauma in that tight space inside of his head, that yeah, he was donezo. There's nothing you could do for him.
Yeah. So here's another one. This is from the most recent one that I put up about the duel between Doria and Guasco.
That one was a fucking...
Doria's, or Guasco, talk about just like surviving. He gets stabbed in the face a couple times. He gets stabbed in the chest. He's bleeding from his chest, but apparently these are not really that serious of wounds because it doesn't slow him down. But then we have a source describe a particularly nasty moment where he says, this other thrust hit him and struck him in the face, and if it had been just a finger's breadth higher, Guasco would have been dead because the blade would have gone into his eyes. The guy twisted the sword around his eye, and Guasco knew nothing of what was going on to him. So there's a sword that's right, I guess, if not in his eye, like right next to his eye, that somebody is
somewhere around the
twisting.
Orbit. Yeah.
It's so brutal.
How do you ignore that and keep fighting? I mean, that's just mind-boggling.
Well, we've talked about two of our responses to injuries, right? We've talked about flight, and we've talked about freeze. Now let's talk about fight. And that duel in particular epitomizes that response, because I've read this in accounts of people who've been stabbed, and they said that they didn't feel the person stabbing them. They couldn't tell they were getting stabbed. They just felt like the person was punching them harder, right?
Right.
Obviously, this isn't the case because you're fighting a fucking duel. You know the other guy has a goddamn sword.
Right.
But the same kind of logic applies here. If you take a hit, your body naturally defends itself mentally by giving you adrenaline, cortisol, and all of those like upper drugs to continue to defend yourself and make it so that you can get out of there. So even if he does get fucking stabbed in the face 6-7 times, whatever the case may be, I think it was 6, a light number.
I think it was 6, yeah.
Yeah.
6 stabs to the face. All right, well, let's continue on. Yeah, go ahead, keep going. We'll continue on with more trauma in that one duel.
You can. If it's not debilitating, if he would have lost the eye, possibly he could have stumbled, right? But even still, you never know what's going to happen to a person when you hit them. You don't. You know that you're going to do some kind of damage, but you don't know how seriously.
Right.
Continue.
It's just a roll of the dice. So then after that, the fight continues on, and it ends up naturally wrestling, because,
of course,
fights do. And the fight now devolves to a wrestling where Guasco is untying the mask, the helmet of Doria, and he gets the helmet off, and then basically starts chomping down on the guy's ear, and supposedly rips a hunk of his ear off with his teeth. So tell us a little bit about human bite wounds.
Okay. Actually, I know quite a bit about human bite wounds. I promise I'm a normal man. But fucking this one's a bit tragic. I knew someone who was bit by somebody and they ended up losing their arm. Due to infection. Bites initially can be very damaging, especially when you're talking about superficial appendages, right? Like noses, eyes, ears, right? You're not going to kill somebody by biting them, I don't think. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's certainly some records where somebody has proven me wrong. That's a given. But it's not a very common thing. And this guy's brain is telling him that he has to do everything he can to defend himself because he does have to, right? He's in a duel. And I'm sure that while I can't speak to the brutality of that necessarily, but fucking Jesus Christ, man! He was just going to town. When you have to defend yourself, you have to do everything in your capability, especially when weapons are on the line, right? And in this particular situation, that was the weapon that he had, so that's the weapon that he used. Does it say how many pieces the ear goes into?
No, he ended up with a hunk. Probably more than Mike Tyson.
I knew it was coming. We all did. I guess, the ear wound isn't going to kill that guy, but it's certainly going to distract him a bit.
Right, so I guess he's now focusing on the ear, because then this is where, they're on the ground trying to gain control of the one good sword left in the fight. And then as best we can tell, maybe that's what you're talking about, the trauma to the ear distracts Doria, so that Guasco is able to get his helmet off, and then he's able to actually do something useful, because he takes the helmet, apparently, is what, as best we can tell, takes the helmet, and then bashes Doria in the head with the helmet to kind of, I guess, render him senseless.
Oh, you can kill somebody that way, for sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm guessing they're steel helmets. Regardless, it's a big, heavy object, and if you do enough concussive force to a person, it's going to kill them.
And then that's not, of course, what ends the fight.
No? Oh, okay. What ends the
Yeah,
fight?
so it keeps going. So then that, I guess, just stuns Doria long enough for Guasco to make a play for the sword, so he ends up with the sword. And Doria has no sword, but Doria is still determined, so I guess he's coming after Guasco with no weapon, which doesn't go well for him.
I would assume not.
Yeah, so then he takes a shot. It sounds like he just takes a full-on Mandritto right to the dome. That leaves him unable to move. Like he's basically just laying on the ground, crippled at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, like we were saying, concussive force directly to the skull without any kind of defense through it whatsoever. That's.
I mean, this is. Yeah, there seems to be a theme with this. That if you're not hitting the head, you're just fucking around.
Head, arms, and legs, or the thrust to the chest. The sources and the accounts are quite clear.
Okay.
I think there's this other great diary that was written about that was written by this surgeon in the 18th century, and he talks about cuts and thrusts and stuff like that, on the Napoleonic battlefield. And he says that the only time that a thrust is dangerous to the skull is when it hits the eye or the mouth, if I recall correctly.
Right.
I could be wrong. I'd have to look it up again. But that bears out in what we're reading here, right?
So you have to hit an orifice, basically.
You have to be able to get some kind of penetration. And there's even one thing, I remember this one quite clearly because of how standing it is. A guy took a bayonet to the forehead and it just scraped off the scalp and it skipped off his fucking head. Yeah, and he made it back. He made a full recovery.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
But
after continuous... continue.
Oh, well, so I was
like,
just going to
even in-
ask, so Doria dies a couple days later. Which of these wounds do you think was the one that most likely killed him? Do you think it was maybe infection from the bite wound, or do you think
No, I don't. I think it's a combination. This is a joyful swirl of a couple of different things, my friend.
Joyful swirl. All right.
This is a combination of the blunt force trauma from the helmet hitting him and the cut to the head. The other wounds, they're superficial, right? You can survive without an ear, but the repeated head trauma might have been the thing that did it, but that final Dritto just straight to the head undefended. Those two things.
So just cranial pressure then, or you think?
Yeah, dude, just fucking cracking into the skull so many times that you're bleeding inside of there.
All right, cool. Well, I guess that's why we wear our helmets when we bicycle.
So what I was gonna say there is, in most shooting training, when you're taught to put somebody down, you're taught to shoot at the T box, right? So across the eyes, down the nose. That's the T box. And then so you usually take one shot to the head and then two to the chest. Yep. That's what if you're trying to subdue somebody, obviously, right? So. I mean, I think it's relatively similar with swords, it sounds like, right?
That's always been kind of my inclination as well.
The anatomy doesn't really change, so it's kind of, that's the sweet spot. Glancing thrusts and things like that to the head, you're gonna miss, even if you hit them in the mouth, for the most part, unless it redirects. But
The skull is very good at doing its job, my friends. It is supposed to deflect things. That's what it's there for.
Right.
So unless you get somebody really square, it's who's to say if you're going to stop them? It's the roll of the dice. I think I would like to say one thing in particular in all of this, right? Is that we are speculating on things that are given to us by second or third hand accounts with unclear with unclear ideas of how this went. While the authors do paint a very good picture of how this is to go, that we are merely just speculating at the possibilities of what could occur in these injuries. But in the case of Guasco and his opponent, that blunt force trauma in combination with the cut to the head, and a thrust or a cut that is delivered anywhere really to like you said, the T-box. The neck also would be another pretty prime target if it is undefended, because of the vasculature there. There's this lovely quote from Piero where a sergeant got cut in the neck and he was bleeding furiously, and so he blotted it up with a neckerchief and ran to him because he was some distance away. And when Piero opened it up to look at it, it spurted at him furiously. His words, not mine. And so he sutured it. He sutured it closed, and the guy was able to make a full recovery. Cuts to the neck too, I think, are something that I don't see a lot of talked about here, which I find interesting, because that would be a target that I would think.
Well, that's
maybe in our next edition. I know of one good case I don't want to get into right now. Is a cut to the neck.
Every time we have a conversation with Conor, we always edge on talking about the Guido Rangone and Ugo Pepoli duel, and then we don't. It never fails. We just tease it.
Starting it back up. I was literally putting all my stuff together.
And we never get there.
I was actually going to ask Conor if he wants to stand in and be the voice of Guido Rangone.
I have the time to do that now. I would absolutely love to do that.
All right. So that
awesome.
you can do Hugo. And you guys can talk shit to each other. It'll be epic.
Oh, I'd love that. Yeah.
Just put me in, coach. I'm good.
All right.
So let's do you have any more anecdotes there, Stephen?
I think those are, I mean, I don't have anything that would be worth talking about after that. That's for sure.
Okay. I also think we covered most of the bases here, right?
Yeah. Let's transition into our last bit here, because given that we are practicing a martial art and there is potential for trauma, one of the things that I wanted to cover is how to deal with trauma situations, because I think it's something that a lot of people are aware of, that a lot of people are probably in some ways prepared for, but most of the time probably aren't actually really prepared for. So let's talk about some potential trauma that could happen in HEMA, and how to heal it, or how to triage the situation the best way possible. Because from my understanding, Conor, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, the general sense is not to intervene, it's to stabilize.
Yes,
right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So I will repeat again, I am not a nurse, I am not a doctor, and I'm not even in the U.S. anymore. Okay, so in the amount of time that I have been over here, the laws might have changed, right? But a general rule of thumb, let's start with event organizers, because they're the people, or event organizers, coaches, people who are holding the space where these things can happen, right? Because we need to have a safe space to do dangerous shit. That's what all of what we do is founded on. If you don't know what to do, call for help, right? That's the most basic thing. If you're holding an event, make sure that you have medical staff there. There's a bunch of places and there's a bunch of organizations that are willing to cover an event to make sure that first aid can be given to people in an appropriate and safe manner, okay? And if you're taking the chance to not do that, good luck. I don't know what else to say. It's incredibly irresponsible if you do not have at least some kind of medical staff present for a larger event, because injuries are going to happen. What we do is at least in some part inherently dangerous. We're just trying to minimize the probability as much as possible so we can all have fun and just enjoy ourselves, right? If you have some kind of first responder training, if you have a little bit of medical know-how and you see an injury occur, right, the best thing that you can do is to think to yourself, is there somebody here that can do this better than I can? And then get the person who's injured to that person, right? Because there's a lot of times where I have seen somebody injured at an event, I have come up, I have saw the medics go over there, I have asked the person they're okay, and then I've gotten the fuck out of the way to let the people who are there to do their job. Okay, a lot of the times we'll see injuries occur at events and people will crowd around them, okay, and prevent first responders from being able to access the patient in this case and then get them where they need to go. The nice thing about HEMA, though, is that we have a lot of people with a lot of great backgrounds that know what they are doing. So in the event that, you know, it's going to take a little bit of time for somebody for a higher level of care to access the person, they can be taken care of. Okay, so let's think about the three general things I think that all of us need to be concerned about as practitioners. Number one, concussions. This doesn't change, right? So, like back then, like now, obviously with masks and no sharps, a person can still get concussed. Okay, the two most common ways that a person will get concussed, to my anecdotal experience, I have not done any studies on this. I could be wrong, is a thrust to the head that causes the head to whip back, okay, and then hard cuts delivered to the side of the head or to the top of the head. All right, in those incidences, a person that is concussed might not display symptoms of it immediately, but might display symptoms of it later. Nausea, vomiting, seeing stars, feeling dizzy, weak. And concussions run a wide gamut of symptoms. The best thing that you can do in that case is to take them to a first responder, okay? Broken fingers, second thing, right? Something that
Before you move on, one of the things that I want to say, just to relate it back to some of the material that we just talked about, because I think it's important to understand, if you think you have a concussion, if you think that you might have experienced a concussion, the best thing that you can do is remove yourself. Like,
yes,
and not continue, right? Don't try to be a tough guy. Don't try to keep going, because a lot of the head wounds and the trauma that we were just talking about with intracranial swelling, that's what you're experiencing. That's why your brain is now starting to betray your body and work against you. And taking repeated hits to the head makes that worse. And that's where things really go wrong. And you can have serious long-term damage. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Don't risk it. Step away.
Thank you, Josh. Aping off of what you said, continuing along what you said, if you have to think about it, it probably happened. That's another thing that I will always stress to people. If you have to think, am I hurt? Did I get a concussion? Assume that you did until proven otherwise. Always assume the worst until proven otherwise when it comes to injuries, right? Because in the moment, we don't have x-ray vision. We don't have advanced capability in the given area that you're in, okay? Moving on to finger breaks, finger injuries, hand injuries, okay? If a finger is broken, if an arm is broken or something like that, just chucking it off the list, okay? Get them to a higher level of care. Get them to your medic. Call 911 if you do not have somebody present in the very bad situation that you don't have anybody present. Call 911. Right? Depending on the injury, ice, elevation, and just get them to sit down, okay? Another thing that can commonly happen is people can faint upon seeing their injuries. I've seen that happen personally a couple of times where they might not have a significant injury, right? They'll go to urgent care later, they'll be fine. But in that moment, because they're not used to seeing their body injured, their blood pressure will drop and they will faint. Get them to sit down, get them an ice pack, you know, give them some compress, whatever the case may be, and just take care of them until somebody can assess them later. The third thing, and this is a bit rarer, but it does occur, dislocations, okay? So somebody throwing out their shoulder, buckling their knee, doing things to their ankles, that occurs, okay? The best thing that you can do in those situations, right? If they have a heavy jacket or something on, zipping it open, I would not advise necessarily to take off the jacket. Maybe wait until like a medical professional is there to manipulate the limb, because you could possibly do more damage to ligaments or something along those lines, right? But remove gloves, mask, get the person to a place where their body can breathe, they can breathe, have them sit down, and just monitor them until advanced care comes up. You're going to hear me say sit down and call somebody for help a lot, because that's what you should do. Same thing with knees and ankles, right? Get them to lay down. You know, if you have something to elevate it, that's great. But like, if it's obviously deformed, don't move it. Right, just put it into a position where the person is comfortable, and then wait for more advanced care to show up. The person needs water, give them small sips of water. Right, I would not say to let them drink a lot of water. Just give them some, and that kind of covers the most basic stuff. Okay, let's talk about worst case scenarios real quick. A penetrating trauma. Okay, that's the first one everybody thinks about. If it stays in, leave it in, okay? Do not remove it. And this is the case where you do not want to do anything to this fucking person until a paramedic shows up, okay? And even still, your job is to help them get onto the gurney if they need extra help. Don't do anything to them. If it's a case where they have numbness and tingling in their limbs after they've been hit in the back of the head, or, you know, maybe there's some possible cervical spinal injury, right? Take off their mask and let them lay down. And even still, I'm not sure if you would really want to take off the mask, because the mask might keep their head and their neck in line. Right. Because that's what we'll often do with motorcycle helmets. We won't remove them. We'll cut them off so that the person's neck isn't injured, or we'll be in hospital, have enough staff to hold the neck, and then remove the helmet afterwards. Cardiac arrest. Okay, most basic one. The thing that almost everybody can do. If you're not CPR certified, there's a class literally in every single place where you live. I don't know why it's not taught in schools. It should be. At least I think it's not taught in schools. I could be wrong. I've been out of school for a long time. No, that's fucking bullshit. Anyway, go get yourself CPR certified. You can save a life. One of my last weeks in Philadelphia, one of my neighbors had a cardiac arrest, and somebody banged on my door. I ran to their house, and I was able to save a person's life, like, just because I knew how to do CPR the right way. If you have to do CPR, remove their clothing, right, or at least like expose the chest. You don't have to take off their shit. I'm not going to go any further, because I think that a BLS certification will be anything better than I can tell you on a fucking podcast.
Fair enough.
But yeah, if you aren't CPR certified, get CPR certified. And the last thing I want to say is I talked about a lot of really traumatic things in a very jokey way, because that is how I cope with the human suffering that I've had to deal with and I've had to treat. I care about every single person that I've taken care of, and I remember a lot of them quite well. And while I am discussing very harmful things in a very kind of gallows humor-like way, I do not want to detract at all from the suffering and trauma and violence that these people experienced. They're just... I'm just trying to use what I have done to help get an understanding of what we do in fencing, because the dark reality of it, at least in these particular cases, is that that's what I got. I got one thing about rules if we got the time for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna echo that statement though, also as a medical professional. That is generally how you will hear. I mean, you hear the same thing, like when we talk to Lachlan Colores, with his military experience, and that's the way a lot of people will find a way to cope. So it's very common. Yeah.
So rule sets. What does historical wounds tell us about how we should formulate rules? The answer is fucking nothing. Because, like I said, wounds are like snowflakes, and every hit might do damage, but not might as much as you would think. Okay, so when we're reading accounts, right? Possibly you could find some kind of way to devise rules based around whatever you read, but it is a simulacrum. Yes, a simulacrum of the real thing, because we cannot do the real thing, right? Not without going to jail for a very long period of time. And the thing that I've done to try to bring a bit more reality while keeping the game of fencing more fun is by using target priority for my rules. I read a lovely article by Sean Franklin, who's written Everything There Is. And one in particular was about like the amount of hits that were delivered with doubles, and the body cut was like the lowest scoring one. And then I read the sources, and all the sources say like the two most commonly targeted things are cuts to the head, cuts to the arms, thrusts to the body, right? And I based my fencing rules, my homebrew rules off of this idea that like there are certain things that are discussed in the sources and that bear out in the reality of fights occurring that we can take and then use while still keeping the game of fencing a fun thing to enjoy. That's what I was able to do. Does it bear anything in reality? Fuck no, but it's fun.
Yeah, I mean, even Manciolino, when he's giving his rules, basically says, the head is the most noble, and therefore,
right.
It has the highest priority. He talks about not hitting the hands, even though he's like in a serious encounter. This is something that you would do because you're going to disable your opponent. But if you're in a friendly bout in the South, you're not going to do that. Right?
Well,
so
they didn't have great hands. They didn't have any great hand surgeons back in the day,
right.
or the protective gloves that we do. So
right,
yeah.
There is the Field of Cloth and Gold, right? When Francis I was gonna, I think this is right. I don't know. I'm vaguely remembering this anecdote, but was gonna have a longsword duel, a two-handed sword duel with Henry VIII. And then said no way because the hand protection isn't good enough. Like that was something that was proposed.
Welcome to between the two-handed sword, bro.
So there just weren't gloves good enough, and he said no way.
So one
it's
thing
interesting.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
In terms of rules for a two-handed sword, one thing that I've been wondering about is because I've had problems with trying to do Bolognese in regular tournament stuff because it just hits too hard. And so I'm wondering about when you're making what you would call like an open cut, where there's not going to be a sword between the target and the person, if turning the flat should actually be considered an acceptable thing there because it will actually keep you from hurting their head, basically.
Mm-hmm. No, because Meyer with the Prellhau, the kind of the crux of the Prellhau is that you're going to provide that percussive force.
It doesn't hit nearly as hard with the flat, is my experience.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
Sort of I think one of the levels of mastery, though, like if you think of this as from the context of a martial art, one of the things about being able to have control in the moments when you are about to deliver that final strike is a sign of mastery. Right? When you can recognize that you are about to deliver that final strike, and that you can have enough control to pull the blow enough that you're not doing anything substantial to the person that you're fighting against.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I believe that, but I've heard that.
I would echo Josh's sentiment on that as well.
Sure.
I would also go and continue to say, like, I think that one of the best things about HEMA and its original sin at the same time is that we are able to experience multitudes within what we do, right? There's no one true way to do it the correct way. Although I would like to see more kind of standardization, at least in certain aspects. Mostly for heresy. Mostly for protective equipment more than anything else. But when it comes to rules, I think that we should be playing with the OG stuff that we have. We should be doing, effectual stuff. We should be doing Bolognese-based rule sets, just to get an idea of what the fuck they were doing, at least to a certain extent. I don't think that there is enough of that because the market for it is a bit small, but more, please.
More. Yeah, I agree. Hey, Conor, did you do HEMA chess at Oktoberfest?
In fact, I did, yes.
Okay, so you saw, you experienced firsthand the joy of the Totentanz timer.
In fact, I did, yes.
So there is, if people are interested, I can put a link in the show description. There's actually an app for your phone. It was originally an app in a game that was developed at the Triangle Sword Guild by Ben Strickling and Nick Roth, and what Ben did in developing this timer is he researched wounds and how long it took for people to die from certain wounds, or how crippling those wounds would be, right? So if you can't, if there's a wound to the hand and you can't keep fighting, then you're done with the fight, right? And so the premise of the wound game is basically that you have this chance, and it's a die roll, basically, right? That's just kind of the way it's built in, but you're doing it with software, as to how severe the wound actually is. And when a hit happens, you call the hit, you determine how severe the wound is. The person who has received the wound doesn't know how severe the wound is, but they know where they got hit. Mm-hmm. And the director will ask them, do you want to continue? And either you can continue and you have a timer going. So if you get a bleeding wound, let's say you get a cut to the leg and your femoral artery is cut, you've got how many seconds? Like
I think it was like 13.
Yes, you've got you don't have long, right? You've got about 10 seconds to reclaim your virtue or you're dead, right? And so your timer starts and you're running out of time. So for like bleeding wounds, there's a timer that is basically how long it's going to take for you to bleed out, and or for that wound to become serious enough through swelling or something like that to cause you to stop fighting, or you just flat out just get disabled. And so it's a really cool app that was developed, I think, by somebody at Rocket City HEMA down in Alabama. They had come up to Oktoberfest and experienced it from what TSG was doing, and then took it down there and developed an app for it. So there's an app available on the phone if you want to play the game. It's super cool. I can write out the rules and kind of get that out there so people can play with that. But just in case you want to,
I got one for you too.
Fire. Yeah.
So I read all these like secondary, tertiary sources, and I thought that a lot of them were really funny. And so what we ended up doing at the end of the month at PCFG is we run scenario tournament where like everybody has a life, and like it's all based off of like D100 rolls as to like what weapon you have, whether or not you're trying to kill, maim, or like hit the person in a way that like stops them from attacking you. And like the secondary weapons that you have, like, because it's basically like a single-handed sword thing, could be like anything from stick to imbracatoria to or a friend who's going to show up in like 5 seconds. And so like you just have somebody start off and you get a timer for 5 seconds. Gun is on the list too, just like a single little Nerf pistol. And then you roll to see what your scenario is. And it could be like you stumbled across 6 guys about to fight in a duel, and your job is to try to stop them from killing each other. And like it's up to them to decide if they're going to turn on you or something like that. You know, it's a bit LARPy, but it's a great time.
Yeah, no, that sounds so fun. That sounds so fun. We were going to do that with one of these years. We'll probably actually do it. We were going to do like a field day of like different HEMA games at Oktoberfest. And the goal was we were going to have, so like we play this one game at TSG where when we're doing our dagger curriculum, if you have a class of like 15, 20 people, whatever, what you do is you have everybody line up in a circle. And you have one person that's in the middle and they have a dagger, and everybody else has daggers, right? And then at random, somebody from the outside circle will come at them with a dagger and they have to defend themselves. And then once they've dispatched that person, another person from another random spot will come in and attack that person with a dagger. And you just go until there's literally nobody left on the outside of the circle. And that's how you practice your dagger techniques. It's a fun game. We call it the Caesar game.
That sounds like a perfect one for dagger play.
Yeah. Because it's usually super random, right? You know, I think I've said this on the podcast before, but Marazzo, the only chapter where Marazzo talks about death, dying, or murder is his dagger section, right? And at the end of his sword and dagger section, he gives a little admonition at the end, and he says on why you should exit with 5 or 6 steps, because you're using a freaking dagger, man. Like, get the hell out of it, right? And Manciolino says the same thing. You know, when it comes to daggers, everybody basically says run away.
Right.
Sword and dagger, dagger. Just run away. Even the ancients said that.
It's all fun and games until the daggers come out.
It
Some
really is.
things have never changed.
Yep.
Nope.
Yeah. All right. Well, gentlemen, that was
That
was
fun.
incredible. Yeah.
Something. It certainly was.
Connor, thank you, buddy. It was great
Anytime.
to see you, man.
Anytime. It was good to
Thanks
see
for
you guys
coming
too.
on, Connor.
Yep.